Hello and welcome. Namo Buddhaya. Sex, masturbation, sexuality, celibacy, pornography. These subjects seem to provoke many questions, comments, and emails, many of which I've received recently, and I hope I've answered I've spoken to you about this directly. If not, I hope here to answer all of those questions, comments, and emails, some quite long emails, mainly trying to justify someone's activities, maybe, or get some kind of comfort from sharing their experience in relation to these matters. But rest assured, there's no justification necessary. There is nothing wrong with what is only natural and human and instinct to procreate, to sustain and continue our species as human beings. So I'll talk about that in a minute. In the meantime, I've been away a little while, a couple of days. On Friday, I visited Colombo. I'm very grateful to the Upasakas, lay men whom kindly drove me to Colombo, taking me to what is known here as the Ministry of Buddha Sasana, so the Ministry of the Buddhist religion, in order to get my paperwork in order for being here, because after all, I'm not really a tourist. I'm here as a monk, living as a monk. My livelihood is that, going on Pindapata each day, collecting alms food, which is generously donated by local people, and of course distributing the surplus, but I am sustained here by generous contributions from lay people like those and yourselves, whom enable me to practice Sila, Samadhi, Panya in this very beautiful country, which is also a Buddhist country in nature and by its constitution. So there are certain requirements with regards to visas, and this usually, as it does in Thailand, entails a visit to a senior monk in a monastery and to the ministry or the department, government organisation that deals with such matters. So there I went on Friday to deal with all of that, and it's with much gratitude to those that put in considerable effort to take me there and assist with translation and paperwork and all of the necessary behind-the-scenes activities that go on in order to enable me to continue living here and do this and practice in a way which is conducive to developing along the path towards Nibbana. Hopefully, sharing this experience with you can also help you all, wherever you may be, to do the same. And then yesterday, some upasikas, lay men and lay women, very kindly gave me the opportunity to accompany them on what is a more tourist activity to Kandy. Kandy is the old capital of this country. Now is a very well-known tourist attraction here in Sri Lanka, where there is a temple which houses the tooth relic, a relic purported to be that of the Buddha, one of three in the world. One is lost, another is elsewhere, and one was smuggled here by a queen and prince, or a prince and princess a long, long time ago, and has been held here ever since and treated as a dhatu, a relic, a physical remains of the earth element, in this case a tooth, an actual visible tooth, relic held in the temple there in Kandy, which is very well known. I'm not making any videos of such visits, such trips, because after all, I'm not a tourist, I'm a practicing monk. I don't have the skills, equipment, or even inclination to do such things, especially as there are so many videos already on YouTube. If you want to look around Sri Lanka, watch those, they're beautiful. It's a beautiful country. You don't need me to show you around. I can relate to you how I interact with those places in a dharmic sense, and that only. So we went there. It was a wonderful trip and experience for me. Fortunately, I went with some people whom had a somewhat privileged access, because it being a major tourist attraction, there would have been, or are, many queues and waiting and things to deal with going in and coming out that aren't very appropriate for a bhikkhu. It's quite difficult for us to remain separate from the crowds when it's a very busy place, especially amongst people whom aren't necessarily Buddhist, but just visiting on their holidays and don't necessarily know the rules pertaining to lay people and bhikkhus in terms of contact. But I went with some people whom had the privilege of us able to drive right into the central enclosure, and for me to go and pay my respects to the dhatu, the relics in the inner sanctum of the temple, really without obstacles. And this was a very privileged experience for me. So I'm grateful also to those Upasakas for allowing me that opportunity. So now on to the subject of the day. One more gratitude, anumodana, appreciation, thanks, that I should add, is to those of you who have kindly answered comments or questions for me. Now, I don't want to promote that forum of comments here on this channel as being some kind of social media forum for discussion, but where many of you whom have watched these videos for a long time now and have seen where I've spoken of subjects and then see a recurring question, where you very kindly, I don't know, pasted a link of the video pertaining to that question or offered advice in respect of those comments or pointed people in the right direction. I do appreciate that very much. It saves me looking them up and doing that, and I think you're better at it than me. Someone has also put lists, timestamps of what questions are answered here and there and where. This does, I must reinforce, does get done by YouTube automatically. It just takes a little while. But I'm not going anywhere. These videos are now over a year old, some of them, and you'll look back and you'll see they're already time-stamped for each question, where there's sufficient space in my talking for YouTube to pick that up automatically. However, I will say, be careful with that one, because I talk from beginning to end unrehearsed. I'm not reading a list of questions and specifically answering one at a time. I jump from one to another in a quite casual way. So to listen to the answer to just one question, you may have missed a part of the answer answered in another related question. Very often the questions are all related because they're coming from a source of recent video which has provoked the question, as in today's subject matter. It's come from one video really that's provoked all of these many questions and comments and emails that I'm having to deal with. So be careful. It's better in the case of videos relating to Buddhism, Dharma talks, for, if you have the time, for you to watch the whole videos, because they generally are not constructed in the same way as other technical videos. It isn't an intellectual, technical practice. It comes from the heart, this message of Dharma, and it should be listened in its entirety, not just taken piecemeal. The shorts that are on this channel do take highlights or aspects really like trailers to invite people in to come and listen to the Dharma, not to answer one specific question. They're out of context in that respect. So, however, gratitude to those who put in that effort to do that. It is helpful to some people. And also the links to books I mentioned, when you can look those up and paste them, if it allows you to do so. I'm not sure whether it does or not, but that's also very useful. I've seen it has happened recently, and I do appreciate that very much. It saves me having to do it, because I do feel that I should. If I mention something and somebody asks how to find it, I'm very keen to try and help as best I can, but time has its constraints. So, sex, masturbation, sexuality, pornography, celibacy, all of these questions that have come up really as a result of just one video recently, which didn't really refer to that subject much, but it was in the title, and that brings in a lot of attention, it seems. And I'm sure also probably disappointed a lot of people if they thought by any stretch of the imagination it was going to be about a Buddhist monk talking about sex, because you will not hear that. We are Buddhist monks, and nuns, and also you'll find in other religions, so in the Christian traditions that have monks and nuns, they are also generally celibate, and even in the Catholic religion, Christian religion, their priests are actually not like vicars in the Church of England. Their priests are celibate also. And celibacy is no sexual activity whatsoever. You'll often hear a teenager or an expression, you may have used it yourself or heard a rebellious person saying to another, "Hey, leave me alone, I'm not a monk, I'm not a nun." You know, it's an expression we hear in the West quite often. And it means that exactly. What it is, monks, nuns leading the renunciant life have renounced worldly life, are trying to purify their mind by focusing their attention on whatever their religion may be, in my case Buddhism, the practice of sila, samadhi, panya, without the distraction of, now, not only sexual desire, but sensual desire, trying to gratify, satisfy what is ultimately insatiable, unsatisfiable. That is the desires we have for seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking about things that give us physical and mental pleasure. Physical pleasure, emotional satisfaction. But we realize through the teachings of the Buddha that this is only very temporary gratification and is only creating more need for more of this kind of stimulation when we try to gratify what is ungratifiable, satisfy what is insatiable. We are adding fuel to the fire continually. Now, as renunciants, we take a precept, or we adapt the precepts to refrain from all sexual activity and to guard our sense doors and windows of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and what we think about, in order not to be adding fuel to the fire of desire, but to allow that fire to cool and eventually go out. This is what Nibbana really refers to, the cooling of desire in order for us to become free from suffering within this lifetime. Slightly different interpretations in different religions as to what we're aspiring to, as to what our goals are, but the method, the way there, of celibacy as part of either vows or precepts is the same, meaning no sexual activity. However, as lay practitioners, even in other religions, there is no downer, there are no aspersions being cast, there are no sins being committed with this aspect which is only natural of human and all sentient beings' lives, that is procreation, or the act of sex, sexual activity itself. It is okay. There is nothing wrong with it. Neither does Christianity, nor does Buddhism or other religions disallow this activity. There may in some religions be various conditions, however, they are only pertaining to the overall principle behind what is the third precept. Now, the third precept in terms of monastics, renunciants, is to refrain from sexual activity. That is nothing whatsoever. In terms of lay people, it is to refrain from, I'm just thinking about getting the wording absolutely right in the English translation, refrain from sexual misconduct. So behaving badly with respect to sexual activity. This is the precept as it's worded. Now, in terms of Buddhism, this leaves a very open arena. Now, not for interpretation as to what is misconduct and what is not, but it is in fact very black and white. Sexual activity of any kind is okay, as long as, like in accordance with the other four precepts, it does no harm, either to yourself or to another. One can expand upon that to say encourages doing no harm, either to yourself or to another. Therefore, as long as it is consensual and to the mutual benefit of both or all parties, it is okay in the eyes of Buddhism, the Buddha, the third precept. So those of you who have commented saying, oh, what's wrong with sex? Why can I have not sex? You can. It's okay. But if you wish to ordain, if you wish to become a monk or a nun, you must realize that that is a life of renunciation where you give up this activity. Initially, you go to live in a monastery for some time as a layperson on 8 precepts, as many people keep 8 precepts once, twice, or even 4 times a month on lunar observance days, maintaining all of those 5 precepts, and in addition to that, the 5 precepts of no killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, or taking of intoxicants, and in addition to that, no eating after noon, so only eating food in the morning, no entertainment or beautification, and no sleeping or lounging around in high and luxurious beds, couches, and sitting places. This expands upon the 5 precepts to 8 precepts, where also the third precept changes from refraining from sexual misconduct to refraining from all sexual activity, just for 1 day or 2 days or 4 days in any 1 month on those lunar observance days. This is perhaps the first step towards full renunciation. Then one might stay in a monastery for a period of time where you're obliged to keep the 8 precepts to get used to it. Then if you decide to ordain, there's quite a rigorous and long drawn out process where you become an anagarika. So you take 10 precepts where you split the 7th precept into 2, and an additional precept is added on. That is no use of any money whatsoever. So you become fully dependent on the Sangha and the supporters of the Sangha, the lay people who look after the Sangha in its monetary and materialistic requisite requirements. So this is the next step as an anagarika living in a monastery, where you have time to really practice brahmacharya, celibacy, and get used to it. Probably a minimum of a year before you can become a novice monk, a samanera, or a nun, samaneri, where you are then going to take on an additional 75 training rules. Now, all of these extra rules are going towards supporting you keeping those 5 precepts and this third precept of celibacy. So that is not looking at things that might stimulate you in that direction or pull you away from keeping the precepts, and all kinds of activities that I won't go into now in those 75 Sakya training rules that are there to help you keep those 5 or 8 or 10 precepts to the best of your ability. For a couple of years you would remain as a novice monk like that. So you've probably spent at least 3 years minimum before you're even going to consider taking bhikkhu or bhikkhuni ordination. At that time you have to be absolutely sure that you're not going to break the 3rd precept, because one of the 4 things that makes you no longer a monk or no longer a nun instantaneously, without any official ceremony, you are, if not even physically disrobed, you're disrobed in the very fact that you are no longer a monk or a nun if you have sex. It's as simple as that. You have to be celibate. So you have to also be sure about this before you ordain. And you should be sure after 3 years living in a monastery keeping celibacy. So it's not like you go from lay life bang into becoming a monk or a nun and suddenly you have to become celibate. That is never asked of anybody. So in terms of what's right and what's wrong, sexual misconduct, one must ask yourself that question. Is this harming myself or harming others, this activity? And as long as it is not, then it is not sexual misconduct. I think the water tank's filling up. You can probably hear that, or hopefully you can't. I can, quite loudly. What happens is they fill these water tanks on roofs and then until they overflow, and then the water goes onto the metal roof below and it makes a rather loud noise. I think this has happened before and it didn't affect the video too much, so I'll continue. So in relation to sex and then the next sexuality, this also comes into question and has been brought to my attention in the many comments and emails that I've received. What about sexuality? Am I gay? Am I straight? Am I don't know all of the politically correct terms these days for people's different ideas of what's fun. What you must remember is none of this is new. It seems to be treated and spoken about these days like it's all a modern thing. Pornography is a modern thing. Transgender people are a modern thing. Absolutely not at all. Right when they were painting with natural dyes on cave walls, there was graphic depictions of sexuality and things going on. Is a very basic form of pornography. There has always been this human instinct, this natural desire to procreate and maintain one's species. And that is why, after all, we are still here. It is nature. In terms of transgender and sexuality in that sense, likewise, in the Buddha's time, and now in modern day India, there are men whom are, to all intents and are born as men, but to all intents and purposes externally appear as ladies. They are a religious sect in themselves. I call them the clappy people, because they come onto buses going like this, and you're supposed to, if you're a normal person and you have money, to give them money. And many people do give them money. They're like a kind of religious order, like monks or nuns, but genderless, but they're dressed as very glamorous, made-up women, and these are men. But these go back right to before the Buddha's time. This is nothing new. And all the Buddha really says about this is, well, it doesn't matter, because you are becoming a monk or a nun, a bhikkhu or a bhikkhuni, to renounce all sexuality. Now, it isn't just that we're renouncing. We're trying to cool desire, as I spoke of at the beginning of this talk. We're trying to attain to nibbana, the cooling of that desire which is causing us all of this suffering, trying to satisfy insatiable desires, gratify ungratifiable, what we think are needs, but are just wanting. Like wanting a glass of something sweet and fizzy, a glass of Coca-Cola, because we're thirsty, when water will do. If we're really thirsty, water is sufficient. But we might prefer to have some Coca-Cola or some Pepsi or something like this because it's tasty. And then even when we're not thirsty, we'll continue to drink this drink because it gives us pleasure. It gives us temporary satisfaction of the taste senses. And sex is no different to this. The more we add fuel to it, the more we want. So in terms of sexuality, it doesn't matter either. Now, if you are in a particular form, whether you agree with it or not, whether you're a man and you would prefer to be a woman, or whether you're a woman and you prefer to be a man, it is better to ordain, and I'm unqualified in this matter, but I'm just bringing it to you from the point of view of a renunciant. It is better to ordain in the form that you are already, because it really doesn't matter. Now, it doesn't matter to me whether I'm a man or a woman. After all, if I'm in England, I'm seen as a bald chap walking around in a dress. People wouldn't necessarily know I'm a Buddhist monk. I might look a very peculiar character walking through my mother's village in Hampshire. But in this modern day and age, nobody's going to comment. They're going to think we better not even look, because he's perhaps wanting to be a woman when he's clearly a man. But it doesn't matter to me, and it shouldn't matter to you. This body is not what our goal is about. So whilst you still have desire to change it, improve it, do anything to it in any form, you are in effect breaking the seventh precept of beautification, adornment, and trying to make the body appeal to others or to yourself. Get sensual gratification from tarting yourself up. If you're having that, you're not even keeping 8 precepts, because you're in breach of the 7th precept. This has to be let go of. So it is an irrelevant issue, an irrelevant question, what sex or sexuality you are. And in relation to pornography, as some people have mentioned as something that they're addicted to, or have or use, and in some cases, in emails I've had, in rather too much detail. You should remember you are addressing a Buddhist monk, and fortunately in this case I think you are aware that I haven't always been a monk. But if you were addressing a Buddhist monk whom has always been a monk from a very young age, it would be certainly considered as very inappropriate, some of the comments, emails and questions that I've received. But that's okay. I've opened myself to this because I've invited you to make comments, ask questions and send emails. I'm only glad that some of them are in the email form and not for public consumption. Being that I'm a man of the world and ordained late in life. So I can deal with such matters without being offended in any way and consider it as just normal and quite an acceptable question. But sometimes when I can see through reading between the lines that you're trying to justify an activity, I will have to say to you that one way to look at it is, well, let's go back to pornography and deal with that first of all. There is nothing good about that. Now, I'm sure perhaps there is, or possibly there is, areas of that kind of entertainment that has been created by consensual people whom mutually benefit. But I would be bold enough to say that 99% of the time that is not the case. There are people involved in that activity through need. Maybe they have addiction problems, or they are under duress. However it is not in its entirety with mutual consent and benefit. and in that respect should be not used, because by the use of it you promote its continuance and its activity, and you are causing harm. It is also very directly going to affect the purity of your own mind. If you cannot understand that, as someone whom I replied to along those lines didn't seem to be able to, I would say to you, will you watch this with your mother? If not, then you shouldn't watch it alone, because you are always watching it with the Buddha, or at least his teachings, the Dharma, and that is the truth of anicca, dukkha, anatta. But the practice of sila, of doing no harm, if you cannot watch this comfortably with your mother, you should not be watching it alone. So ask yourself that question in relation to pornography and stop watching it. It isn't doing you any good. I hope that answers all of those questions that have come up in relation to that subject, because it is not a subject I want to really have to refer back to time and time again. What I will refer back to time and time again is sensual desire, because sensual desire is what we are trying to reduce in order to become free from suffering in this lifetime. And how do we do that? We do that through the practice as the Buddha has taught us, with his infinite compassion, his wisdom, his loving kindness, metta, and also the fact that he had this patience to speak to people from all walks of life. And we can read about this and read his words in the 184,000 different suttas in the Sutta Pitaka for 45 years of his life, when he could have just remained in a state of bliss and contentment until his parinibbana, having attained to nibbana, having attained to arahantship. He chose to share through whatever mediums he had available to him at the time, which was talking face to face with people. He chose to share the Dharma, his teachings, his experience of seeing the truth as it is, this reality, these characteristics of existence. And his sharing of that with people in his time, 2,566 years ago, has been conveyed firstly in verbal form and then later written down and shared then by his disciples in that lineage to the modern day Sangha of today, of bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, whom talk to and share in whatever mediums and forms are available to them now, more often than not in this kind of a situation, in this kind of format, or on this platform of what we call YouTube. This seems to be a way that is popular. People can listen to it in the relative comfort of their own home or their car, or sitting somewhere peaceful, and you can also have some interaction afterwards by way of these comments and questions. So by no means am I criticizing any of you for the comments and questions, which I invite you to do continuously and ask you to continue to provide me with, because they are the basis of what makes this channel. But this channel will remain quite natural in its format and unrehearsed, unpracticed, and a little unorganized, because I am a practicing Buddhist monk living in the forest, living in this Buddhist country, and having to not support myself, but use the requisites that supporters provide me with to the best of my ability, to live comfortably enough to be able to practice meditation, and also to be able to then share my experience of that, the Dharma, with you. In relation to where I'm staying at the moment, as you know, this is temporary, but my new kuti, a kuti is where a monk lives, a little hut or a house. We can live in a monastery, an empty building under a tree, in the open air, in a cave, or an empty building. An empty building became available, which is being made into a little kuti, which is the word for where a monk's room, bedroom if you like, although we don't have beds, but somewhere where we can spend the night, and also a cool place to spend time in meditation during the day. Now, I've been offered a wonderful little place, this is in the grounds of the same place, much more peaceful than where I was staying before. I could deal with the noise, but people coming to see me, of which there are quite a few more these days, found it a little uncomfortable trying to listen to me and over and above all the traffic. So rather than me having to shout, then we can have a much more peaceful time of it. So that is well underway now over this last few days, and I don't interfere. I'm letting it just get on as it is, and hopefully within due course I'll be moving into that new accommodation and inviting you in there to join me in future with these talks, as well as other little locations when I go to the beach or other places to meditate, and I take you along with me in the near future. And at that time I hope to resume the live morning chanting. At the moment this is a very quiet spot where I am, and there is an elderly gentleman living quite nearby, and I don't want to disturb that peace with my chanting in the morning, so I'm very happy to just meditate for that time each morning. It gives me an extra half an hour before after my usual morning meditation, which is about 3 hours. I have an extra half hour of meditation then before I go on Pindapata, my morning alms round. So that's all coming very soon, along with answering all of the rest of your comments and questions that have built up in the meantime. I do hope that there is something useful in there, and also please don't take offence to any words I may have used. They are only words I'm repeating, and not wanting to confuse the issue, but also not wanting to seem too direct, only to really address your concerns, issues, and maybe aspects that may be misunderstood, make those things a little clearer. So in that sense, I hope there is something useful for you in that content, and if not, please don't let it bother you or think you need to reply by way of debate or argument. We can let it rest there, let go, and if we have a different opinion, we can just live with that opinion, try it for ourselves, experience, because this is the only way we can see the real proof, the evidence, tangible results in the way we live our lives, is the practice of Sila, Samadhi, Panya. So thank you for watching. Until next time, be happy and stay well. Sukhi Hotu.